With the Z-Modeler brush active, hover over a poly and press spacebar to open up the Z-Modeler poly menu. With the Z-Modeler poly menu open, you'll see a series of actions, targets, and then corresponding modifiers. Locate the Qmesh action. When you first load up the Z-Modeler brush, the default polygon operation will be Qmesh a poly. So the action will be set to Qmesh and the target will be set to a single poly. Now to use the Qmesh action, just hover over a poly and click and drag, and that poly will be extruded outward. Now, as you first use this brush, you may notice that it's quite a bit like an extrude, but the Qmesh action is actually a lot more powerful. So if I come over this poly here and Qmesh out, you'll notice as soon as I start dragging, it will fuse with the polygon next to it. And while it's still fusing, I can move my mouse and it will control the angle of offset to the other poly. So this functionality allows you to come through and quickly extrude areas of your model out and weld them together automatically. So if I hold down Shift and Smooth, you'll see that they are completely welded. Now this process works really well with some of the other default settings in the Z-Modeler brush. So if I hover over an edge, the default setting right now is Insert an Edge Loop. So I'm just going to insert some edges here to assist with the usage of the Qmesh action. I'm just going to cut a few in here. Now, if I want to subtract an area on my model, the Qmesh action will also be able to handle that. So unlike an extrude, if I click on this poly here and click and drag down, it will actually extract or remove that actual poly from the model there. And while it's actually subtracting the volume of that geometry, it's also closing the holes that would have been left behind. So this process will allow you to come through and subtract different areas of your model. So if I want to come through and just move these parts out of the way, I can just click and drag and those polygons will be removed. If I find out that I did in fact want those polygons there, I can simply come back and just Qmesh one of these polys and drag that back into place. So with this, you can just kind of come through and just kind of make shapes or modify areas on your geometry very fast with this brush. Now the Qmesh action also has a bunch of varying modifiers down here. These first ones are determining how many steps are going to be generated when you actually perform the Qmesh action. So right now it's set to a line 10th step. So if I just Qmesh this part out, and now I Qmesh an adjacent polygon, you'll see that it's giving me up to 10 steps in which I can get that angle to generate. If I undo that and then go hold spacebar and get back into my Z-Modeler poly menu, if I change this to a half step and now Qmesh the poly there, it's going to only give me 2 steps. So it's going to give me the half step and then the full step. So the settings through here will determine the step size of the actual alignment. Below that you have a series of modifiers. So you have the option by default, which is one side poly, and then you have an option such as multi-sides by brush. What this is going to do is as you perform the Qmesh action, it's going to generate edge loops along the surface of the model based on your actual brush size. So right now with the draw size of 19 on the surface, I'm getting about this many rows generated. If I change my draw size to a larger size here and then Qmesh that poly, you're going to see that I'm going to get larger steps. So this is great if you just want to create rows of even topology across your model. This is great for environment building where you need to make pillars or columns and have them all divided up evenly across an area. The other options down here, you have the attraction settings, which will determine how quick the fusion process actually happens. Then you have other options such as triangle snap and extended snap. The triangle snap will allow you to create triangles on the surface of your model. Right now, by default, if I just Qmesh these guys out, it's only going to give me quadded surfaces along my geometry. If I undo that and turn on Enable Triangle Snap, upon clicking, the first actual step it will generate will be a triangle. So this will allow you to generate triangle shapes as you're modeling. If you don't want to have any triangles generated on your mesh while you're using the Qmesh action, just make sure this is turned to disabled. Next, you have the option to disable or enable the extended snap. With the extended snap disabled, if I hover over a poly and click and drag, it will always stop at the height of the polygon beside it. If I undo that and hit spacebar to go back into the Z-Modeler poly menu and turn on Enable Extended Snap, now when I click on this poly here to apply the Qmesh action and click and drag, I'll be able to overshoot that actual edge. So this will allow you to get shapes generated like so across your mesh. Now the Qmesh action has a few more little hidden features. So one option the Qmesh brush has is the ability to actually take a face